Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Research Seminar Series. My name is Samuel Dodson. I'm a professor at the high school. Our department is hosting this event on the territory of the Seneca Nation, which the university occupies. I think this is important to recognize not only in this talk, but in our roles as professionals. Having recently moved to Buffalo, I'm continuing to learn about my responsibilities, about what decolonizing means in my practice, but also more broadly in archival, library, and information science. Today, we are joined by Dr. Nadia Caidi, who is a professor at the University of Toronto's Faculty of Information. Dr. Caidi has made many significant contributions to the field through her theorizing of information policy, practice, and pedagogy. She's also a leader and has previously served as the president of the International Association for Information Science and Technology, or ASIST. My understanding is that today Dr. Caidi will be presenting for up to 50 minutes with time for about 10 minutes of discussion. So please feel free to submit any questions for Dr. Caidi to the chat during the question and answer. I am very much looking forward to learning from Dr. Caidi's insights and encourage you all to check out her latest book, Humanizing LIS Education in Practice, which I'll post a link to in the chat. But for now, please join me in welcoming our guest and speaker, Dr. Nadia Caidi.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dodson. Lovely to meet you. Thank you to Heidi, Julian, and to the University of Buffalo, the high school, for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you. Before I do that, I just wanted to do a quick land acknowledgement. I live in the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. It is home to 6 indigenous language families, which include over 18 languages and dialects. And I am very grateful to be part of this land and to be able to work here. I am going to talk to you today about a number of things that I have been thinking about in the last few years. And the way I put it in the abstract is more in the form of a question. And I want us, and it's really an invitation to reflect together on our field, LIS, but information sciences, broadly speaking, and the extent to which we really practice what we preach and what we collectively can do to further our thinking, our commitment to change and action towards the communities we serve, towards the value that we uphold. So I just, I am inviting all of us to lend ourselves to this exercise. So I'm going to just share with you, I guess this is the one, yeah. A slide deck that I prepared just to guide you through, to take you on a tour of what led me to really think about these questions, and hopefully it will be kind of the starting point for a conversation. So this is kind of a little bit about me, about these are the current areas of research that I'm involved in with my student, with my team. As you can see in the yellow box, usually there are a few threads that run through my work. I'm interested in what we call human information behavior or information practices of individuals and communities. I'm interested in policy. I really see the work we do as needing to effect change and to effect policy and action on that front. And I'm also very interested in what we call, the DEIJ, diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice conversation, and what it means for our profession. So these are the recurring threads that you can see in a lot of the work that I'm engaged in. Again, coming back on the policy shaping aspect. These are a few of the roles that I'm taking on in addition to teaching and publishing and service to our community. I cannot emphasize enough, in my view, the importance of this policy work, this being part, not only of the community of people we serve, we provide services to, but in terms of reaching out to a broader array of stakeholders, engaging those really understanding our profession and the work we do as part of a broader policy landscape. And I'll come back to that throughout the talk. So for those of you who are familiar or not, but human information behavior is a lot about asking, how information fits in the lives of individuals. And these are the kinds of questions that I ask a lot during my research. These have to be always in my mind understood within this underlying dynamics of what you can see here of individual and groups, social networks, their access to resources, social capital, alongside the broader regulatory frameworks, the policy arenas that underpin a lot of the work we do to work with the communities, to engage them, to provide them with the kinds of access that they need, and so on. So one is never kind of decoupled from the other, and it's really what drives a lot of my interest and research. And no matter what kind of information professional one chooses to become, I see increasingly that intertwining of these levels, the micro, the mezzo, and the macro, and I'll come back to that in a minute. What you see in this slide is a snapshot of our faculty, our high school at the University of Toronto. And what you can see here is that we have 4 programs. We have a BI, we have an MI, a Master of Information, we have a Master of Museum Studies, and we have a PhD program. Within the Master of Information alone, you can take up to almost 10 specializations now. LIS, Archives and Record Management, Culture and Technology, and the emergent areas, really popular: user experience design, human-centered data science, information systems and design. And the point here is whether you go and you come to us for LIS, for records management, or to be a UX designer, you can see that we are constantly, our students will constantly be navigating this micro, mezzo, macro levels when it comes to this intersection in some way between information, technology, and people. I want to share with you this chart, which shows over the past 5 years what were the most popular concentration within our Masters of Information. And there's a number of interesting points here, but the big one that jumps LIS is decreasing. The enrollment in LIS, which was, the most popular concentration for the longest time, for all our whole history, we see that really decreasing. And instead, there's a lot of interest in UXD, lots of interest in information systems design, and increasingly the newest one, the human-centered data science. I always interrogate these data. What does it mean? What does it mean? And if our students, the future information professionals, are converging towards UXD, IST, HCDS, how do we bring in, the information and the people within those areas to really maintain that balance? So I don't know how the picture looks like at Buffalo, but I'm pretty certain this is a trend that is cutting across many high schools. And I think we have to interrogate ourselves, why is that so? And how can we, without resisting this wave, just adjust the curriculum to ensure that while we keep up with the demands, and these are legitimate demands, as you can see here, this is from 2015, but this is the report from Giancarlo Berto, Paul Yeagers, and others about re-envisioning the MLIS. And already in 2015, they were telling us a shift in focus towards individual and communities increasingly. Working with data, engaging in assessment is a trend that we have known for a while. And also what kinds of competency this change will require. So this is a question that we as programs, as educators have been facing for a while. And it's the way we respond to it that I think is really interesting and important. And I like a quote from the report where they say that neither love for books or libraries is enough for the next generation of information professionals. Instead, we must thrive on change, embrace public service, and seek challenges that require creative solutions. And many of these ideas you will see kind of reverberate throughout this talk in terms of who are we educating and for what? And also I would say with what consequences, with what implications. So this is, again, just to go back, it's not that I'm pitching the high school to you, but it's just as an example because this is the school that I know best. We are seeing the emergence, you know, that adjustment process I was mentioning. These are a sample of courses just from this year that we're increasingly offering, and we see a hunger on the part of students in LIS to take the UX for GLAMS, data librarianship, copyright, and licensing for an information professional, critical data studies, social justice for archivists, social digital memory, just sustainable design. Just you can see how we need to do that work internally to try to kind of always go back to what we stand for as an information school and what differentiates us from computer science or education or psychology or other departments. Along the way, what we also know is this notion of social responsibility, of equity, of inclusion, of meaningful representation has also pervaded the LIS discourses for a long time. And we often like to think that it is at the heart of our discourses, practices, and the heart of scholarship, the scholarship that we do. With my colleague Karen Daly from Denver U, we have been thinking a lot about why despite DEI pervading LIS, it's in our credo, it's in our ethical stance. Despite it all, why is it that the state of diversity is not really seeming to be improving enough, improving quickly enough, both in educational and professional settings? And I'll come back to this notion of what can we do better in terms of attracting, recruiting, retaining information professionals from underrepresented communities in our field? Because I don't know about Buffalo, but in Toronto, it's really, we're not quite there yet around LIS and archives and record management and museum studies. Much less of an issue, I would say, in UXD, in HCDS, but in the so-called traditional information professions, we are having a really hard time attracting, recruiting people. So what is it about our professions that doesn't quite connect or resonate with people who really have a stake in this in terms of, you know, community archiving, in terms of storytelling about the communities, in terms of managing their records and writing, kind of making space for their own lived experiences and documenting that as part of the field. In an article with Karen in LQ, we talked about this concept of diversity by design. And really, the key idea is diversity cannot be just something that you put on top, like salt and pepper, add a course in diversity here, something there. It has to really be more systemic in nature. It has to be integral to everything we do, the way we operate as an high school, but also as a society, I would say. Diversity is a reality of life. It's not an issue, something that needs to be fixed. And also, and more importantly, I think it's everybody's business. It is not just some people's business and not others. We are all concerned by that. And I would say that, even before our book came out, we are all in agreement that these issues matter. We hear a lot about it. For those of you who attended the new librarianship symposium last week, and I think there's one session left this week. It is an issue that we have looked at, that we know about, right? It's no longer new, or we are addressing these questions. I want to push a little bit the envelope by saying, while we do understand the importance of it, are we really ready? Are we really doing the work within our departments, within the hiring committees that we are in? Are we truly doing this more systematic, more integral redesign of our programs in the way in which we recruit people? Is it really reflecting kind of a much more holistic view? And I'm not really sure yet about that. I think there's some good developments, but when we think about DI issues, we have to think about technology management. We have to think about space, about the curriculum, workplace issues, the way we create or reorganize our knowledge infrastructures. And the second part of that we are very committed to is really to think about how do we take these attitude and translate it into change. We love to say that we as information professionals are change agents. What does that mean? And are we ready to change ourselves to start with? And I'll just give you a few examples at these three levels: the micro, how we engage with people who come through our doors, or not. What if they don't? What do we do about that? At the mezzo level, in terms of dealing with institutions in our neighborhoods, the schools, and then again at this macro level. And I will start with the macro level. And these are just a few recent articles that I think should be required readings. I give them as required readings in my foundational courses that I teach. This is about really coming to terms with our own history in the profession, what our institutions stand for. And I think we cannot be educating anyone without really having them reflect and assess really what kind of social institutions are we, our history, what we stand for, and the fact that we have not always been inclusive, period. And it's okay. Like, once we have stated that, we've put it out there, and these are all fantastic articles. These are kind of specific to archives, but we have tons of wonderful work in LIS, in museum studies as well, that really kind of returns to kind of these foundational pillars that underpin the creation of libraries, archives, and museums in Canada, in the US, and elsewhere. I always tell this story that, I grew up in France, but I am of North African origin. And growing up in France, you know what? The public library was a place that I didn't feel particularly welcome. It was a very French place. It was a very white place. It was the Zola, the Flaubert, the Molière. You could find everybody, but I never felt like my culture was represented in this library. It was not a welcoming space by any stretch of the imagination, not only in terms of the signage, in terms of the organization of the collection, but even just the content. I loved libraries, but I would never say that they represented my community. And I think it's a reality that many people have to this day. And I think that we need to kind of start thinking a little bit about that. These are quotes, direct quotes taken from a summit that happened a few years ago, that was organized by Libraries and Archives Canada, in which was a great summit. And there was one panel that was about Indigenous librarianship, one panel in the whole day. But some of the things we've heard were really powerful. Historians from some First Nations communities saying things that I think we need to hear, like really pay attention to what is being said. Our connection with our past, as stored in museums, archives, libraries, is troubled. How can we work on reconciliation when so much energy is spent on basic operational funding and grant writing just to keep the doors open, leave alone engaging in true reconciliation? What does that mean, really? The importance of language. I'm doing some work on language justice increasingly, just to kind of understand how language is in infrastructure of access as well. And very, very interesting. Like, this is also about kind of listening to the community and reflecting on what it means for us. When we hear things like our artifacts have been pillaged and incarcerated in institutions of all sorts all over the world. These objects have been removed from our nations and our people. We want them back. How does that work with what we do and our concept of collection development, our conceptions? So really kind of engaging with these kinds of discourses and narratives at the macro level. At the mezzo level, let's say, all of us, as I mentioned, are very much engaged in DEI work, in trying to really make our programs more representative, I guess, of our many communities. And again, how are we going about it? Are we going about this the right way? For the longest time, as I mentioned, other than the tokenistic course on diversity or international librarianship, which is my favorite, that we were like putting here and there, we need to do work differently. We need to think about how diversity should be required in every single course. It is everybody's business. It's just not my business as the token people or person of color in the department to talk about X or Y or Z. It should be in the database design course. It should be in the metadata course. It should be in every single course in our program, because it's a very easy case to be made why injustice pervades our systems, our knowledge infrastructure, the way we provide services, and so on and so forth. Accreditation, curricular redesign, readings, just diversifying readings, and the kinds of deliverables that can be assigned, the kinds of assignments that we give students. How hard would it be to think about them beyond maybe the traditional term paper and make them a little bit more suitable to a range of ways of knowing and mode of operating? Support from faculty administration around recruitment and retention. We have all sat in hiring committees where decisions are made without, I was just having a conversation with somebody from another department yesterday, and they were like, well, we are looking for the best person ever, like the pedigree at all costs. And I'm like, well, but is this all? Like, is there, well, we agree that we need somebody who's excellent at what they do, but I think we do have a little margin of maneuver there to be able to also choose people who may not sound disciplinary wise, like us, who can provide a different perspective, like being a bit more of a risk taker in terms of how we envision our department and what we can bring to the mix to make things a little bit different. So recruitment and retention, tenure and promotion, resource allocation, the invisible labor that many people take on just to make the whole machine, work. My big fight right now is on equitable practices around community engaged learning and research. We are told, yes, community engagement is fantastic, work with the community, it's great. But when it comes time to get those grants, and if you really want to be honest about who needs the money more, it's not me at the university. It is the community partners that I work with. And yet, when we get these big grants, my university comes back and our university comes back and tells us, but you're not bringing any cash. How come the money is sitting over there, not here? How can we reconcile really working meaningfully and effectively with communities, and you're encouraging us to do that. You see, it's great, it's part of our mandate, it's fantastic. But in practice, it is not recognized. And especially for like people on the tenure track, I think this is a message that has to be said loud and clear, because it is very dysfunctional in my mind that it doesn't make sense what is being said versus what is being actually done in practice. And at the University of Toronto, for example, there's a huge collaboration, I would say, across units to really deal with this issue, whether it's in medicine, whether it's in the humanities or social sciences, whether it's in our high school. How can we reconcile, these narratives about, yes, but really it's within these metrics, is in this paradigm, and that is really wrong. And I'm putting in a good fight at this time. Students, what happens in the classroom? I find sometimes that even our students really want to do community work and we really want to get their hands dirty, but not too much, because it's really hard to work with communities, especially in the context. Of course, we're going to have a couple of examples for you just to show you what I mean. But even, it is not a very easy thing to teach within the context of a course, how to work meaningfully with communities in theory. Because when you do it in practice, it's not comfortable. And I remember, I will tell you a little bit about a project I did on working on reading with First Nations in some remote and isolated communities in the north of Ontario, where over 2 courses, I had the students really engaged with members of the community. And I remember so clearly some of my students really being freaked out because they would hear from some of the elders from the community we were working with, telling them, you guys know nothing. You guys are sitting in Toronto. You don't know anything about our reality. And my students, I remember, were traumatized because they wanted to do something, but they also had to come to this understanding that it's okay not to know. It's okay to listen. And I think that was the point that was being made. It's like, just don't try to fix me. Don't try to fix this. Just take a break, listen to what I'm telling you, and this is our reality. And no, we don't need another digital library. I need you to listen to what I'm saying. So we need time to build these connections into our coursework. We need time to really provide students with this kind of experience. It's not something we can deliver in a 10-week course over Zoom, right? So some of the questions you see on the slide is, who are we attracting to the professions? Are they supported? Do they feel valued and included? And really, are we leaving the field in a better place? This is the question that at the micro level, I think should really guide a lot of the work we do. How can we measure the ability to affect change in the community? This is the project I was telling you. It's a few years old now, but it was a collaboration between our faculty and some First Nations communities in remote and very isolated communities in Northern Ontario. We, as I said, we built the partnership across a number of courses. And it was a wonderful learning experiences because students really got to interact, really got to put themselves in the shoes of the community, and really kind of took on a different kind of role, and really had to contend with humility. You're not the expert. I'm not asking you to be the expert. I'm just asking you to engage, to be part of this journey. We're going to do this together. And we take it for granted when we kind of theorize about it, but it's really an important thing to walk the walk, to really engage in that. We also were able to send a few students to some of these communities, and it was really a wonderful learning experience, and I can answer more questions as we go. Another example is through some of the work I've been doing with francophone communities in minority contexts, so outside of Quebec, where French is the majority language. In all of the other provinces in Canada, French is is a secondary language. It's really an Anglophone environment where Francophone have to strive. And in the context, again, of a course, we were able to kind of organize a round table where students, again, did not have all the answers, but the point was not even to have the answers. The point was really to foster an environment where we could bring together stakeholders and really showcase what information professionals how they can support this particular initiative, which is to create vibrant Francophone communities in minority contexts. And this was a wonderful outcome, because I built these initiatives in the class, in the class itself. Language is something that I'm really passionate about. I think of it as really a necessary infrastructure to establish in order to talk about things like access and discoverability and accessibility of content. We need that infrastructure in order to be able to create, vibrant and supportive communities. So again, kind of looking at it through the lens of human information behavior, what are the media habits and practices of Francophones? What do they access in terms of what's available to them? What do they need? What are some of the characteristics of accessibility and discoverability of content? And more importantly, how is the broader policy and regulatory framework enabling us to do that? Do we need stronger language policies in Ontario and other provinces? Do we need a framework that would enable some of this work to happen more? The last example I wanted to share with you was really about some of the work that I've spent a long time kind of working on, which is migrant information behavior or newcomer and immigrant research. And again, this idea that information means different things at different stages of one's life. And this is some of the work around kind of newcomers and immigrants, where it's an interesting reminder for all of us that information means different things at different times. Sometimes it's just like, what is this thing? The first image you see is what used to be the tokens used for public transportation. Now it's gone. Now we have a card. But at that time, they were just like very simple, concrete questions that newcomers had about what is this? What does that mean? And things like, so information in a more concrete sense. But we all know that information is about more than that, and newcomers also need to understand how to learn in a new context. They need to understand kind of the culture, what some of these pictures stand for. For example, the last picture you see, the doctor examining the patient. It's cultural. What the doctor-patient relationship looks like is not something that is taken for granted. It's something that you have to be acculturated into, and it is informational. In a lot of the work that I've done, my work, but also that of many other colleagues, some of them are here in the call, working on immigrant information behavior, have taught us a lot of things about how information fits in the lives of newcomer as well as longer established immigrants, because we just don't stop one day magically to be an immigrant. We know that people, human sources matter in terms of information uptake and trust. We know that language matters and that people will triangulate sometimes, searching in different languages for different reasons. We know that transnational networks are really important in the lives of immigrants, for example. We also know that the very act of searching for information is a form of cultural literacy. It allows you to understand how the system works, how the new country's rules work, and so on. And yet, we still make assumptions, for example, about newcomers. Now I'm talking us as information professional. We assume this generic immigrant, that we think about when we think about providing services to newcomers in the library. We wait for them to come for ESL classes, for citizenship classes, for children programming or for homework, and that's fine and that's great and that's important. But there is so much that exists out there, information resources, information grounds that exists despite of us, and those places we don't always go there. These are just a few examples in some of the research we've done with Anita Kamlodia, UMBC, and others about these places where information resides, where information is created without us. But my point is we need to go there. We need to be in those spaces that have been created for very specific purposes. Loonlounge is a site that was created a long time ago to just basically do some peer-to-peer sharing and learning. This is called the torontodesi site, and it is torontodesi. It's for the South Asian community, and it's really a wonderful place. I always tell my students, you need to be there. You need to be plugged into these sources, because this is what information navigation looks like for somebody who's new to the city, who is looking at members of their community for information, for advice, for support, even support. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to entertain them. But we learned a lot of really interesting things from looking at places like Torontodesi and so on. We know that there are all kinds of barriers, both structural as well as social, and that access for the sake of access is not enough. Information is what creates information. Organizing information and is really important for successful communities. That the importance of information is there, but the importance of involving people in sharing their stories, in giving advice to one another, in getting this sense of I will come back later to the sense of support and the importance of self-esteem. It's not like you leave who you are, your identity at the door when you are a newcomer to a country. You still want to feel that you are a doctor, or that you are somebody who is resourceful, that somebody who is well connected. So people have lots that they can share. And sometimes I feel that in the profession, we underplay the role of these kind of resources that already exist out there and curated by members of the community, and also and that we underplay this affective dimension, this more psychological aspect of wanting to be needed, wanting to be seen as helpful and useful and empowering, like giving agency to people instead of considering them always as deficit, as needing information to fill something. No, there's a lot of expertise, there's a lot of passion actually for curating information. This is example of a listserv and a Facebook group organized by members of the medical profession, to help each other study for the exam to be a healthcare professional. And it's fascinating when you're going there. There's misinformation, of course, but there's also tons of really interesting ways in which people triangulate and correct information and really share experiences. So the question that you see in red here is, how can service providers, us, make effective use of these kind of channels and resources? And I talked earlier about this generic newcomer that we like to construct. It's not always the case. I'm doing a project right now with Tech Girls Canada here in Toronto, and we're looking at women who are highly qualified, who decide to come to Canada because they had expertise and experience in STEM. And we are kind of mapping their labor market integration. And the stories we're hearing are horrendous. There are a lot of challenges that people are experiencing regardless of their level of literacy, of their expertise and experiences. So we use that information about their lived experience to really question the system, to question immigration policy and labor policy, okay? And what we are doing also in this project, as you can see here, is we are retelling the stories differently. Yes, we'll be writing a paper for sure, but we are also working with these women to talk, to do some advocacy work. So here we did an online exhibit that was curated by a museum of a Masters of Museum Studies student that is available on the Tech Girls Canada website that has snippet of audio, because we want you to hear what these women sound. They are not just like immigrant women. They have a particular sound. They are very articulate despite their accent, and they are very angry. And it's okay. It's okay, because the grateful immigrant trope is so passé, right? So I think it's really about kind of, when I say shaping policy and affecting change, is also by giving the community the tool to just say even things like, I regret coming to Canada. I should have gone elsewhere. You should have told me. I did not get the right information. I think it's really powerful. It's a story worth telling. And one of the reasons for the immigrant women in STEM was this blow to their self-esteem. You were a highly paid a doctor running a team of 50, and here you can volunteer in a hospital. What does that do to your self-esteem, your sense of professional and social identity, right? So I think it's really looking at the human behind the degree. And in our book with Karen, like the humanizing LAS research is by really exhorting our own professionals to think about the human behind the user, right? It's not the same thing. It is not the same thing. People like to be informed, but people like to be involved. People like to share stories. People like to be an expert sometimes, or to be asked. I think I'm running a little bit of time, but I wanted just to kind of focus on the notion of different kinds of formats to tell the stories. Is really important. There's lots of really amazing resources that are out there that we can use, we can reuse as part of the work we do, whether it is about health information or about cancer screening, and kind of working with communities to send this to raise awareness about these health conditions. Many of you may be aware by the excellent work by Somerville and EcoHawk about the importance of working with communities, with members of the communities, to enrich metadata. This is around a photography collection, and how an information professional themselves will get decent metadata, but if you bring in the community, you can add texture and details and anecdotes. It really makes for richer metadata, and it benefits everyone, right? It's a principle of universal design. So kind of how do we bring the community into the work we do for the betterment of everyone else? I really like what Lecky Bushman and Siobhan Stevenson talk about. Using technology, through UXD, through human-centered data science is all great, but in service of what? And they talk about emancipatory optimism, which I think is great, which is this idea that how can we make technology productive? Technology should be in the service of positive, sustainable social change. And I will leave you with just a few suggestions for us to think a little bit more about what it is that we do, about allowing ourselves to be altered by our encounter with the communities in all their complexity, really, and can confirm our commitment to this collaborative process, engaging with kindness and openness to learning. We don't have to be neutral. We don't have to be expert. We just have to show up and listen and reflect and problem solve together. We have to encourage our staff and graduates to think creatively, but also to use their own cultural and social assets, whether it's language competency that they have that can serve, whether it's their familiarity with the culture or the line of work that they're engaging in, whether they share personal trauma with others, right? So really allowing ourselves to change. When we talk about inclusion, really, it is this act of creating environments in which people, groups feel welcome, respected, supported, meaningful, valued. Instead of diversity, which is overly used now, I prefer to think about meaningful representation, you know, in our professions, to reflect who we serve. What do we need to do to be able to truly attract, recruit, retain people who are not able to attract to the professions? I think that is one of the biggest challenge we have. And then maybe think about new success measures, right? Not just circulation count or who gets through our doors, but relationship building, sustainability in terms of engagement, and more mentorship, more support programs. And I will leave it at that. I hope we have some time for the conversation. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Caidi. I feel like we have a lot to learn from this presentation. So I'll be facilitating the Q&A for the next 10 minutes or so. So please feel free, everyone, to raise your hand or submit a question to the chat for me to read aloud. Val, I see your hands up.
Yes, thank you for a very interesting talk, Nadia. I actually have lived in those very isolated, in a couple of those very isolated communities that you, not the ones that you mentioned in Northwestern Ontario, but I lived in a town of 1,500 on the Trans-Canada in the middle of nowhere with no hospital, 1,500 people. And then I lived in a place in the bush, just east of Thunder Bay called Manitouwadge. My husband was in the mining business. So coming from that background, I understand the struggles and the feeling that the experts are coming in from the city to do research, and then they go back to develop the policy. And often that policy that they bring back doesn't really apply to the community's situation. My question for you, and it's kind of multifaceted, I do apologize, is how do you ensure that this kind of thing doesn't happen? In other words, how long does engagement with the community members last? Does it continue into the implementation of the policy, the writing of and implementation, and after? And finally, what methods do you use to ensure equity between your research participants and you as the researcher? So you don't have the case of the researcher and the researched. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, absolutely, Val. Thank you. Thank you. Great question. So the first question was, how long does it last to kind of get engaged? It can last a long. It will last however long it takes to establish trust with the community, right? So for example, we are working with some communities now, and I'm really planning for writing a grant or whatever in a year or a year and a half. So it's giving time for the relationship and the trust to build, instead of just saying, oh, you know, I'm applying for this next month, would you be interested, right? So I think we live in a culture, in an academic culture, that doesn't really always gel with those practices, like the time it takes to develop this relationship. So the one I was involved in, for example, Val, some colleagues of mine, including in the faculty, Andrew Clement, Leslie Shade, were already having that relationship established over a few years. So it was easier for me and my student to jump in and to work on a specific project. And we came a little bit with a willingness to learn about the broader, because it was not just about reading in First Nation, it was about much, much more. But at least we were kind of coming in with that the people vouching for us, if you will, which is okay, and I think it's really important. And again, as I said, I did not write the project into one course. I really knew that we would, even my student would need a long time to warm up and for the trust but once you have that relationship established with some community partners, you become the person who they trust to bring in others. So I was the guarantor that my student would know how to respectfully engage with them. It was part of the contract, of the deal that we had, you know what I mean? And the community members were wonderful and they were supportive, but they really liked pushing at the students so that they realized that this is the reality also of working with communities. So in the Reading for First Nations, Val, we started with this great plan. Let's do a digital libraries for these communities. Wow. And they were like, we don't care. We don't want that. This is what we want. So
Well, and
the
also,
students, sorry?
Oh, I was just going to say, and also it's so important to have community members that can continue,
Yes,
like
absolutely.
that you have worked with, that you know can continue on with the project,
Absolutely.
but also come to you for advice. But I guess what we experienced, and this is a while ago, a long time ago, but it still does happen, is just the researchers coming in and doing their thing and then writing a policy, and it's government is bad for that, and then leaving, and then it's sort of like, well, this is what we were left with. Yeah,
absolutely. And unfortunately, our systems are not designed to kind of continue unless it's part of your research agenda. But what was interesting, just to finish on that, is some of my students ended up really being engaged and were very interested in continuing that relationship. So it can take on many different facets. And the notion of the second part about equity, how do you ensure that people are equally represented? It is not easy. It is, but it's not hard either. It is really just us questioning this notion of being the expert. And I see that a lot even in students coming in, and they think, it's not that they think they're expert, they think they are here to fix something, to find a solution. And I think that's the biggest learning. If they can just learn one thing from my classes, you don't have to fix anything.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we have time for several more questions. Again, just please feel free to raise your hand or type them into the chat. Dr. Caidi, I was wondering, how do you see the concept and practice of EDJI having possibly shifted across time or place in the field? For example, are there specific stories, whether historical or maybe beyond North America, that we should be looking to as we try to recruit, train, and retain a diverse community?
Good question. I don't think we have time to answer this question. I think we need a whole other seminar, but yes, we do actually have questions. We have had for a long time people telling us about communities being excluded, about type of services not working for them, about the need for more accessibility for a range of people. So it's not that we woke up one day and realize, oh wow, diversity and equity and inclusion matters. I think it's like we are at a time when people are, it's a double-edged sword, what's going on right now in our field, but I would say in the university as a whole. I don't think anybody is able to go through their business in an academic context or in any other context without having to articulate how DEIJ fits in their work, right? And what I'm seeing, and this is true for the field, but also for a range of other contexts, that it has become performative, right? People are trying so hard to understand what it's about, but understand how it matters, how it means in your own context, and what you can do about it all at the same time. I think that we are being, frankly, while the present moment allows us to think very, very carefully and very deeply, I would say more than any other moment in the field today about these questions, we are also, again, caught into this rush to find a solution for it. So is the solution going to be more courses on this? Is the solution going to be hiring more people, with this particular characteristics? And again, I don't know that we are really taking the time to reflect on how we as a field, we as the academic culture, let's say, need to really do that more in-depth work that's going to take a lot of time, and it's a lot of resistance in some way. I'm thinking, for example, in terms of scholarly publishing. What does DEIJ mean in scholarly arenas, in terms of bringing in a diversity of voices, when really the structure of the article is the same? You always are constrained to tell the stories in a particular way that maybe doesn't work well with some ways of knowing, some ways of telling stories that doesn't fit in that mold. Another example is how English as a dominant language really is difficult for other people. It's difficult to tell somebody's. It's difficult to publish, let's say, if English is not your first language. In a couple of days, I'm giving a talk in French, and I'm paralyzed by it because although it's my first language, I don't sound good in French anymore and just imagine if I know this area and I'm able to, and I know the language, but I'm having difficulty really kind of expressing what I want to say in a way that's meaningful in French. All the people who are trying from other parts of the world, non-English speaking world, to try to share their findings, share their studies in a language that is not theirs, and always being kind of faced with, oh, this is not clear, go get an editor, the language is incomprehensible. So there are a lot of barriers that we haven't really started thinking about yet. It's okay, DEIJ, as long as you write perfectly in English about some stories that are happening elsewhere, So my point that I'm trying to do is, we have always had to contend with DEIJ in the field. We have intrinsically some really welcoming values, and our ethos is in the right place. But in terms of truly affecting meaningful change, I think we have to be careful, because like many other sectors, we can fall into the performative instead into the integral work that needs to be done. And I think we are not necessarily better than others, despite being these kind of social institutions that are really for the public interest and valuing all these great things. So I don't know if it helps, Samuel, but that's kind of the best I can do in 2 minutes.
That was excellent. Thank you. I do see we're at noon. And so before we sign off, I would invite all of us to join in thanking our guest. Again, Dr. Nadia Caidi, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much. And I'm putting my email on the chat. If you have any question, follow-up, interest in reaching out, please feel free to. And thank you to Dr. Dodson and Dr. Julian and everybody who attended. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.